Hello everyone, it's Jack from Visual Effects. So today we just want to have a look at creating a digital nature scene, quite quick and fast. So I just want to create a plane to start, and I want to create a figure. So the figure is just literally just for scale. We want to scale this up. We'll probably want to times this by 10 and times by 10. Move it that way. Actually, we can squash that down a little bit and make that a bit bigger. So what we'd like to do next is we would like to create a displacement object. So we just go to our modifiers, displacer shading, and we will create a gradient. We'll make that a child of the plane, and also we'll crank up the segments of this plane. And what we want to do is, because we're doing like a digital nature scene, we kind of want to make just like a little mini river valley or something, kind of that kind of thing. So black pushes it down and white pops it up. So what we want to do is we want to have whites either side and the black in the middle. Change direction so that it's going this way. So what we can see is we can see this real smooth little dip. We want to make that just a little bit more obvious for now, just by changing the height and then going back into our shading, and we want to make some variation in this so it's not so neat. We just can do that quite simply by just changing the turbulence of this gradient, which is quite nice. Scale that up, and we kind of want to narrow this valley a little bit more because it's not a massive river, because we want to like do a scene where we've got trees and stuff. So we'll just pull this white further forward, pull this white further forward as well, and let that feather off just a little bit more. Just make the turbulence a bit less, and then go back to our settings and just shrink that down a bit. Could equally do it the other way around, which is cool as well. So that's kind of our base ground done now. So majority of the scene will work around this. So for ease, we're probably going to use Quixel textures just to speed the flow of this tutorial up. But equally, you can use textures from Visual Effects Hut. And you can actually set them up in Quixel Bridge so it's fast. So what we want to do is we just want to find a basic forest ground. So this is the one that's just going to leak through a lot of the other assets that we use. So we can go for something quite bog standard and basic. Quite like this one. Although it does look like it'd repeat quite a bit. Maybe this one. So for now we're just going to go for a 2K res. As this is an Octane tutorial, we're going to have to change our render engine to Octane here, otherwise it'll send in standard Cinema 4D textures, and we don't want that. So you can jump back into Bridge and then just press export, and it'll drag it into Octane for us. We can probably put this to the side so we can start seeing what we're doing, and we'll drag our texture onto the ground. good to see it from the top view as well, because perspective sometimes distorts and it makes it look like, well, that's probably right, but actually it's massively stretched. So we just want to crank that up to about 12 by 12. There we go, something like that. So what we want to do is you want to just check that our displacement's ticked, and it is, which is great. We want it checked to 2K, and we just want to add a little bit more variation. A little tip as well, in the extensions, the Megascans plugin, recommend using EXRs. So if you do use EXRs, you can just click this here and you can enable displacement by default. So although it's put it on for us, sometimes it doesn't. So having that ticked will help. So I'm going to just use a HDRI environment now. Be lazy and get one from Cinema 4D. It's a new library, which is pretty cool. We'll go for kind of something that's a little bit overcast. No, we won't, because it looks boring. I'll just chuck something else in. I quite like this asset browser workflow. It's quite neat. Okay. I'll just pair it up a little bit, spin it around somewhere different for a change. Maybe there. So the next thing I want to do is I want to duplicate this and create another texture. So let's go back to bridge. And I kind of want a muddy ground. Let's see if there's something better. Yeah, that'll do nicely. I don't know that one. So texture, even just finding the textures is part of the job, and it's kind of that these might get swapped in and around at certain times as well. So we'll export that to Cinema, and we'll drop that on that plane too. So turn that one off for now, and just make sure that we're happy with the new tiling of this one. Go in and change the displacement settings again, 2K, and we'll make this one a bit more big. We'll turn on the other layer, just so we can see how much of it pokes through. Cool. It might turn the rocks. Might lower this to make it look less repeaty. For now, yep, that works. This is kind of an early time to do it, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So just put in some water in, just to kind of see and help us start to shape that river. I'm not going to be too bothered about repeating patterns on this one because we're going to have assets that are going to break it up. But if you really wanted to, this would be a good time to start getting it sorted. So only want a little tiny stream. For now, we can just go in and just create a specular material. We can alter this later, but for now, that will be fine. But just jump in and turn fake shadows on. Maybe thin wall. No. Leave that one for now. Another useful tip is actually if you attach a dirt node to a layer, especially a color layer, we put that multiply in here. So all I'm doing now is I'm just attaching a dirt to this so that we can crank up anywhere where that water touches the sides. So we're getting just a little bit of a line here now, which is nice. Again, adding a little bit of variation. So the next thing I want to do is I want to scatter a few little elements, nothing major, so just maybe a few 3D plants. So we'll just pick something foresty. We'll definitely pick some grass. And probably something downloaded already. Maybe a few of these common ferns. So we'll group these that we've just imported. So this is the grass. And these are the ferns. Always save your work. And this is base 1, and base 2, and then water. So let's start with the grass. So we're going to create an Octane scatter to do this for us. And what we want to say is we want to say in our Octane scatter we want to scatter on, let's do base 2 surface, and we want to do type surface. So you can just drop our grass in there, probably as individual items though. And we will want to hide these. So as you can see, that is kind of spreading the grass on all of this scene, and we don't want that. And we don't want it to look so uniform either. So we do want more. So we'll up the count probably by 8,000. Maybe even more, so we'll go 20,000. Yeah, it's looking better. But as you can see, it's doing this weird pattern thing, which might be what you want, but we don't. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a few effectors to kind of get this to look a bit more random. And to do that, we just want to go to our mode graph effectors, and we'll go to random first. Go to our Octane scatter, drop random in the effector, and there we go, it's scattering a bit more random, which is nice. But what you will notice is it's popping out of the ground, and we do not want that. So that's just because we've set to just position. So turning that off means that this effect is now doing nothing, which is not good. So we want to set it to remap, and we want to do rotation, and we just want to rotate the grass a little bit so that it varies across. So now we've got different rotation, so it's not as uniform, but still pretty uniform in terms of the pattern and distribution. Again, for this scene, because I'm going to be putting trees down, it probably doesn't matter, but let's get it looking a bit better than this still. And then we'll also want to affect the scale as well. So the scale, we want to affect by 111. Maybe more than that. 4, 4, no way. 2, 2, 2. So now there's a little bit more variation, probably a bit too much rotation, so let's go back on that. Just turn the scale off as well because it's actually not looking nice. So you can see here that it's actually just moving these just a subtle amount. That's just a bit of a randomer. The next little trick is I want to add a shader. So the shader, I'm going to drop into here, and then let's just adjust that. So in the shader, we can go to gradient. I'll create a new one, but we could actually just save the other one as a preset and import it here as well. Once you're in shader, you'll notice that it does weird things. So you just need to just click in it and just make sure it's set to remap. Otherwise it's not going to work the way it intended. Again, we need to change that to V. Put that in the middle. Have our grassy at the side again. Have a little bit of turbulence. Nothing too crazy. So I'm gonna change it from remap to absolute, just because we're getting more of the count, which I actually want. Distort these positions a little bit to get something that we like the look of. Again, don't go too crazy on the rotation, but just a little bit. So there we go, we broke it up a little bit. And we get in. It just looks a bit more realistic, I guess. You can actually then change the amount of that you want to use these effects using these sliders, which is great, and you can do it over time as well for certain animations that you might want to do. But I'll just go for what we had. Actually no, it was actually nicer halfway. We can change the seed as well to create different variations. And then we can add a shader here as well, just a subtle one, to create further variation. Maybe in just the height. It is cool just playing with this to see what happens. It's really neat. Probably going to crank the count up a little bit more. So we're just going in and refining these settings just a little bit more, just to make it look a bit more what we want. So now we've got these patches, which is great. Then we're just going to go into our Octane Scatter, Distribution, and then the shader in there as well. Create this gradient again. It's a bit repetitive and boring, but we'll see what happens. We'll go to V again, and we will channel this so that we have no grass in that middle. You can see that we're just kind of manipulating this shape just a little bit more. Doesn't matter if there's a little tiny patch of grass in the middle, but I don't want it to be overpowering so that it looks like the grass is floating. There we go, that's looking pretty cool. We'll get our little dude, plonk him in here for scale again. And that's the grass done. So then we'll create our water, put it back in there, looking nice. And then the next thing we want to do is scatter a few plants. Actually no, The next thing we want to do actually is create some, add some Megascans assets. So these can be just stuff to help fill and bulk up your scene a little bit more. Again, we do a few assets, we're working on a few more, but at the moment Quixel is probably your best bet to get a lot of things. To save on time, let's just type in nature. So what we'll do is we'll just add a few of these in. I could recommend as well, like, actually going out there and scanning some of your own things, because it doesn't need to be necessarily high res if it's just going to be a tiny asset in your scene. We're thinking about doing some 3D scan grounds as well, so rather than just always using textures, you can just use the odd ground. So let's just come out of our scene. Let's create a camera because this is an okay angle to work from. And let's start plonking our assets in. So we'll scale this one down just a tad. Add a bit of variation to mesh. And start creating some hero assets, I guess, as well. I don't usually recommend shrinking the assets because they've been designed for a specific scale. Sometimes it's quite nice to have a little bit of a different look to everyone else's. Another quick tip. If you've got an asset that you're going to use more than once, rather than keep cloning it and wasting VRAM, what you can do is you can just hit the instance button and then we'll get another instance of it. Anything that you do to the one will affect all of them. Now that is the only caveat. So it just means that you're only loading that one asset once into the VRAM. So you've got little bricks poking out. It's quite nice. I think if we just, again, we instance that, we might use this as a background asset. To break up that harsh line at the top. So we can see that that's kind of looking quite nice now. We can start, we can potentially put a few more assets in, maybe a few rocks. Those can be scattered as well, but for the sake of this video, I think I'll just add a few myself. Again, remembering to instance. Also keep your project organised. I'm not going to for this tutorial, just for speed, but do it. If you hold control as well and drag, then you can get another asset from that. It'll just automatically create another instance. And remembering to spin them assets around so that they don't look the same all the time. Thinking about where they'd be in nature. Use reference imagery as well. This is from nothing, but if you do use imagery, you'll get something that looks a bit more realistic. I don't like that texture, so I'm going to shrink it down. Let's actually just check that texture. because it looks quite metallic. So, as you can see, that's looking quite nice now. I actually can't help myself. I'm going to actually group those and just call those assets underscore ground. Because it means that we can turn it off as well and create different variations. And we'll group all these together as well and call this the grass. Plus mods, so we know that it's all in one place. I will probably then use these as, this is quite a simple scene as in it's just 3 planes, but this would be usually like what I'd label base. So that's kind of the base scene, pretty much the core elements that help shape the image. I usually put in base, and then everything else can be turned on and off. So we're going to, for the plants now, I think this is alright, because we're going to add trees, so we don't need to necessarily fill these areas. Create another Octane Scatter, get our ferns, drag them in Octane Scatter, and then put Octane Scatter in ferns. This time we're going to do something that's a slightly bit different. So we're going to get one of our bases. We're just going to make this an editable mesh, and we're just going to remove the river. So what we want to do is we want to highlight these and then just go to just want to hit this button 100%. So now we've got this vertex map. So when you click on it, you click off, we can click on that and we can see the yellow and the red. So we can use that as part of our scatter now. So I will turn off the grass. And we'll just have our ferns for this one. So we'll put that back into the displacer. We'll get our ferns Octane Scatter, and we'll change this to surface, base 1, and we can start to see it's being populated by these ferns, but we want to attach into this vertex map. I'm going to invert it because it was actually in the river and I don't want it in the river. So now the red is not being affected and the plants are going to be scattered on anywhere that's yellow. We can adjust this as well, but let's leave it as it is for now. And we'll scatter probably 6,000 plants. But they look quite small, so we're going to cheat this a little bit and we're going to scale them up probably by 1.4. Yeah. You can add as many different types of plants in here as well. I'd recommend that rather than going for the one species, but for this example, again, we're just going to go for this one. The effectors, we can actually try and see if the random don't like that. No, let's create our own for the plants. So we're just going to go into MoGraphs and we're going to probably go for a shader again. Put this in ferns. And we want it to be affecting scale maybe, and the rotation 9. No, let's do them all. And we want to jump into shading, and we want to go into noise. And as we can see, it's starting to change the shape of these plants, which is quite nice. Just playing through these settings to... If we adjust the contrast, then you'll get more variation, so there'll be some massive ones, some smaller ones. But somewhere in the middle, we'll get a mix. And I think I'm happy with something like that, but let's just times that by 4. So it's 4 times the amount of plants. So that's looking good. So now I'm happy with that. Let's bring everything else back that we've got so far. Awesome, it's looking good. And I think for the last thing in this example, we're going to try just 2 more things, and that is just adding trees and then just a bit of lighting. If you plan on just having this scene from this angle, then you could add trees to separate planes, which I think I might do for this one, which means you've got more control over where you put the trees. So let me show you that technique. So what we'll do is we'll create a plane. A 1000 by 1000, and this is just going to be a tree square. So we will just texture it with the like forest ground texture that we're using. We'll tile it by 5 maybe. So these are going to be like tree sections, and we can then instance those as well. So let's load in some trees. I'm going to use some from MaxTree because they are fantastic. So we're just going to load. So we've got our trees now. Because trees are so expensive in terms of memory, it might be worth actually showing one. So if you think you want one in a specific place, this might be the best. That's hideous. This might be the best time to put them, some of the hero trees where you want them. If you do want to add wind to your trees as well, definitely check out one of our wind videos that we did. So what we want to do is we want to scatter these trees. So again, we're just going to go Objects, Octane Scatter, and we're going to call this Tree Base. Put our trees in this Octane Scatter. Wait for the computer to have an absolute meltdown. Press, change the type to a surface again, and then surface tree base. There we go, there's the meltdown. And we only want probably a distribution of about, not necessarily 5, a bit more than that. We'll add a noise for a little bit of variation. And then again, we'll go in and create another random for the trees. So they just break up a little bit. This one we can afford to have them pop out the ground a little bit more than others. Can have a bit more rotation. Very subtle on that one. And very subtle on that one too. It's more this one. So the reason I like to build these in tree modules is because you've got more control over them, and you can quickly move little sections about. So we can now just start moving this in the ground. Like so. A little bit deeper than that. But what I want to do before anything else, I want to correct this and make sure get a bit more height out of the tree. So we're going to scale these up by 2. You can move that base down a little bit as well. So as you can see that we're getting that pretty cool niceness. If we was to just completely control and copy this now, we'll have more control over each module, but you can instance as well. So once you've got your hero trees at the foreground, you can start instancing these modules. So we just need want full control over these ones at the front. Let's click on our scene. Bad. Shape it like that. And then what we can do is, like I just said, is we're happy with that kind of framing with these little trees here. We can then just instance this one because it's more dense. So if you're good with vertex maps and even shader maps to get the distribution, then that's probably going to be faster. But if you want constant flexibility and the quick iterations of being able to move and manipulate trees quite quickly like this, then I quite like this modular approach. Duplicate that module again, and then have them that side. Okay, so now we've got a cool looking scene and it's starting to look quite good, but we just want to make it look a bit more believable. So I'm going to raise the water level just a tad. Potentially going to get rid of this light for now and just use Octane lights. And we're going to, before we do any lighting changes, we're going to jump to path tracing. So adjust these settings so the computer doesn't have a meltdown. Do a quick adaptive noise check. Perhaps not that high. Okay. So that's looking pretty cool. So let's get some lights now. So we want to just jump in and create a daylight. We will remove our guy now because it's going to really throw us off and make it look fake. I'm going to set the power to about 4 and the sun intensity to about 8 so we can get some really nice looking light. And then let's just play with where that light's coming from. I quite like hot spots like this, they look just really nice. But what we're going to do as well, we're going to bring the power up again to probably about 8, so generally the whole scene gets a bit brighter. And that sun intensity we can potentially knock up a little bit. If we want a softer spread, so it's not just like that little pocket, we can make the sun bigger. But that might make it a little bit less realistic, sorry. A bit more ethereal, so we'll stick with what we had. Or maybe even 0.88. When you're just dialing in the look as well, sometimes it's nice to just play with that north offset just to help see if a little tiny movement of light might help create a slightly better look. But I was quite happy with what we had. The other thing I'm not liking, or I'm not keen on, is that orange. So we'll cool it down a little bit. That's personal preference though. And then the turbidity, it just diffuses the whole image, and I always feel like it makes it kind of feel more realistic because you never get good weather. But that might just be a UK thing. We'll make the power again to compensate, knock the power up again to compensate for that, and knock that intensity up again. Probably knock that back down. And already we're noticing that we've got quite a nice looking scene. We can then jump in the camera images to just do some more final little tweaks, like boosting the image up a little bit. It's probably better to get the lighting right than boosting this camera up though. This advice has changed a bit since all these videos have been created. And this subtle vignette, although it's probably worth doing that in post, but just to give us an idea of what it looks like. This is quite nice. Don't think there's any need for hot pixel removal, but if 0.8 generally won't really affect your image that much, so just do it anyway. I love this highlight compression feature if you're not going to render in ACES, it's really useful. And then we could probably go for a subtle bloom. So I like to ramp it all the way up first, show that it's affecting everything, and then just go to the cutoff, knock it down a tad, and then just really push that down so it's just a subtle bloom. By no means is this an amazing perfect scene, it was just kind of showing you the principles of using all these tools and what you can do with it. Just to finish this scene off, we will just add some more stuff in the background because I don't like how simple that is. So just come out, let's pull that over, probably this side, push it quite far back, not too far back. And then I think I'm going to duplicate this, again, create that instance. I do love Quixel assets. This would have taken absolutely ages, and now you can generate a scene within a few hours, which is absolutely fantastic. That kind of gives a completely different vibe though now. Maybe that should be in the background. just breaking it up a little bit more, so it's less like we're going into heaven. But that's pretty much how you get a nice looking scene. And the beautiful thing about MaxTree as well is the transmission's already set up for you as well, which is absolutely incredible. So if we just see what that's doing. Yeah, so look, you can see that the transmission of the light through these trees is amazing, and that's just down to the fact that the way the textures have been set up. It's nothing super special, and Quixel do it as well, but not always. So it's worth double checking, because that literally makes how everything looks super realistic. And the transmission's got an image texture. The last thing I want to show you as well is sometimes you get these really dark spots. And it's usually if you've used dirt maps or you've got two meshes colliding quite closely, they look quite gross, and it's really hard to composite when you've got this. So just turning alpha shadows off on the ambient occlusion pass will massively help when compositing, and then bump and normal mapping if you've got bump and normal maps, which you can see on that rock in particular. You can add that extra little bit of detail in. So that's been creating a digital nature scene in as little time as I could possibly show you, and I hope you found it quite useful, and I'll catch you on the next one.